Derek Hollis signed the termination letter with a smile on Christmas Eve, handed an 11-year employee a cardboard box, and had security walk him out while the office party played behind closed doors. Marcus Webb packed his tools in silence, nodded once, and stopped by the basement on his way out, not to take anything, just to tighten a valve he knew would cause a flood by January if nobody caught it. Nobody saw him do it. That small, quiet act of care was the beginning of Derek's end. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. Marcus Webb had worked at Caldwell Properties for 11 years, 3 months, and if you asked him, about 14 days. He knew the building the way a father knows his children. He knew that the second-floor radiator clicked 3 times before it kicked on every morning. He knew that the freight elevator needed exactly 2 seconds between floors, or it would shudder. He knew every tenant by name, every lease renewal cycle, and every birthday of every receptionist on every floor. He was not just the head of maintenance, he was the building's memory. The tenants knew it too. When the law firm on the 4th floor had a burst pipe at 2 in the morning on a February Tuesday, it was Marcus who answered the phone. Not a contractor, not a supervisor. Marcus. He showed up in 37 minutes with the right parts already in his truck because he had predicted that section of pipe would go based on the water pressure readings he had logged 6 weeks prior. The firm's senior partner, a meticulous man named Howard Chen, had looked at him that morning and said, "Marcus, you saved us about $40,000 last night." Marcus had smiled and said, "Just doing my job, Mr. Chen." Howard had pressed $200 into his hand. Marcus had tried to give it back. Howard had refused. That was Marcus. That was the kind of man Derek Hollis had never taken 5 minutes to understand. Derek arrived at Caldwell Properties in June of that year, transferred from a regional office in Phoenix with a reputation for slashing overhead and maximizing short-term margins. He wore pressed shirts and spoke in corporate acronyms and had a habit of walking the floors with a clipboard, making notes that nobody ever got to read. From the moment he arrived, the energy in the building shifted. Longtime employees felt it immediately, that particular tension that comes when someone in power has already decided who matters and who doesn't before a single conversation has taken place. Derek looked at Marcus once during his first week, looked at the name on his badge, looked at the mop cart beside him, and moved on without a word. 3 weeks later, Derek called a private meeting with the operations director, a nervous man named Phil Garrett, and laid out his restructuring vision. He wanted to eliminate the in-house maintenance team entirely and replace them with contracted labor. A firm called Fast Fix Solutions that, as Marcus would later discover, was operated by Derek's college roommate. The savings on paper were significant. The savings in reality were fictional. But the paperwork looked clean, and Derek knew how to make paperwork look clean. Phil had pushed back quietly. "Marcus has been here 11 years, he said. "The tenants love him. We've never had a major maintenance failure on his watch." Derek had looked at Phil the way someone looks at a child who has said something innocent and useless. "That's sweet," he said, "but sentiment doesn't show up on a balance sheet." The meeting lasted 14 minutes. The decision was effectively made in the first 2. Marcus didn't know any of this. He went on doing his job. In September, he noticed the 3rd-floor HVAC unit was developing an irregular cycle and submitted a detailed maintenance report with cost projections for repair versus replacement. The report went unread. In October, he flagged a structural concern in the parking structure, a minor crack in a support column that needed monitoring. The work order was deprioritized. In November, he trained 2 junior staff members on the building's emergency shut-off systems, even though nobody had asked him to, because he believed someone always needed to know. He went home every evening to his wife, Diane, who was 7 months pregnant with their first child. Their apartment was small but clean. Marcus had a corner of the living room set up with a second-hand desk, 2 bookshelves packed with real estate investment books, legal guides, and financial analysis textbooks, and a yellow legal pad where he tracked his notes. He had been studying commercial real estate for 3 years. He had attended weekend investor meetups in the city, introduced himself quietly, listened more than he talked, and slowly built a network of people who respected the quality of his thinking, even when they didn't fully understand why a building janitor was asking such precise questions about cap rates and debt service coverage ratios. One of those people was Gerald Caldwell. Gerald had founded Caldwell Properties 22 years earlier and had built it from a single commercial property into a respectable mid-sized portfolio. He had stepped back from day-to-day operations 4 years ago, handing the reins to a management group while retaining a minority ownership stake. But Gerald still came by the building occasionally, not to inspect anything, just because he loved it. It had been his life's work. And every time he came, Marcus was the one who greeted him in the lobby, walked with him, told him how the building was doing in the specific, personal language that Gerald still understood. "You talk about this building like it's alive," Gerald had told Marcus once, standing in the basement beside the main electrical panel. "It kind of is," Marcus had said. "Everything has a rhythm, you just have to learn to listen to it." Gerald had looked at him for a long moment. "You ever think about owning something like this someday?" Marcus had smiled and said, "Every single day." They had laughed, but Marcus had not been joking. December arrived. The building was decorated for Christmas, a large tree in the lobby, garland on the elevator doors, a wreath that Marcus had personally hung on the main entrance every year for the past decade. Tenants stopped by his station to drop off cards and small gifts. Howard Chen brought him a bottle of wine and said, "You're the best thing about this building, Marcus. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Marcus had thanked him, genuinely moved, and placed the bottle carefully in his locker. On Christmas Eve, at 3:17 in the afternoon, Phil Garrett appeared at the door of the maintenance office with his eyes cast downward and asked Marcus if he could come upstairs. Derek Hollis was standing behind his desk when Marcus entered. There was no chair offered. There was an envelope on the desk. Derek picked it up and held it out without ceremony. "We're restructuring the maintenance operations," Derek said. "Your position is being eliminated effective today. This contains your final check and information about your severance." Marcus looked at the envelope. He looked at Derek. He looked at Phil, who was staring at the floor as though he hoped it might swallow him. "Today," Marcus said, "not a question, a confirmation." "We appreciate your service," Derek said, already looking back at his monitor. "Security will help you collect your things." Something passed across Marcus's face in that moment. Not anger, exactly, and not grief, though both were present somewhere beneath the surface. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. It was the expression of a man who has been underestimated so many times that he has stopped being surprised by it, and has long since redirected all that energy into something productive. "All right," Marcus said. He went downstairs. He packed his tools, his personal items, his books, his yellow legal pad, the bottle of wine from Howard Chen. The young security guard assigned to escort him, a 23-year-old named Travis who had always been kind to him, was visibly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Webb," Travis said quietly. "This isn't right." "You're doing your job," Marcus told him. "No apology needed." At the bottom of the stairs, before he walked out for the last time, Marcus paused at a mechanical closet and pulled the door open. He crouched down, pulled a small wrench from his coat pocket, and tightened a valve on the main water line, a valve he had flagged twice in maintenance reports that had gone ignored. If that valve failed, and it would have failed within 3 weeks, it would have flooded the basement and caused an estimated $60,000 in damage to tenant property. Travis watched him do it, without understanding what he was watching. Marcus closed the closet, stood up, and walked out into the cold Christmas Eve air with his cardboard box. He did not look back. He called Diane from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "How'd it go?" she asked carefully, because she had sensed something was wrong when he had texted her earlier. "They let me go," he said. Silence, then, Marcus. "I'm okay," he said. And the remarkable thing, the thing that would only make sense later, when everything that followed had come to pass, was that he meant it. Marcus drove home through streets lined with Christmas lights, his cardboard box on the passenger seat, his mind already moving forward. Diane was waiting at the door when he arrived. She looked at his face, looked at the box, and pulled him into a hug without saying a single word. They stood in the doorway like that for a long time, the cold air coming in around them, her pregnant belly pressed against him, and Marcus held on and breathed and let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Then he stepped back, kissed her forehead, and carried the box inside. "What are we going to do?" Diane asked, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "What we've always been doing," Marcus said. "Just faster now." She looked at him carefully. "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified," he said, "but I've been preparing for something my whole life. I just didn't know it was going to start on Christmas Eve." She laughed despite herself. That was Marcus. That had always been Marcus. He spent Christmas Day with Diane, away from his desk, away from his legal pad, fully present in a way he hadn't been in months. They watched old movies and cooked too much food and talked about the baby and what they would name her and what kind of world they wanted to build for her. But on the morning of December 26th, Marcus was at his desk before sunrise with his legal pad open and his phone in his hand. The first call he made was to Gerald Caldwell. Gerald answered on the third ring, his voice warm and slightly surprised. "Marcus, Merry Christmas. Everything all right with the building?" "I don't work there anymore," Marcus said. "They let me go Christmas Eve." A long pause. "They did what?" Marcus told him the full story, calmly, without bitterness, just the facts laid out in the precise, organized way he approached every problem. Derek Hollis, the restructuring, fast fix solutions, the contractor arrangement. Gerald listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, the silence on the line lasted several seconds. "That valve you tightened," Gerald said finally. "You filed reports on that twice, didn't you?" "3 times, Marcus said. Another pause. Then Gerald said something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "I owe you a conversation, son. Can you come to my office on the 28th? Marcus said yes, before the sentence was finished. Meanwhile, back at Caldwell Properties, the first cracks were already forming. Fast Fix Solutions took over building maintenance on January 2nd. By January 9th, the 4th-floor HVAC unit that Muckers had flagged in September failed completely, leaving 3 tenants without heat for 2 days in the middle of winter. Huck Chun called Phil, gulped, and delivered a controlled, devastating critique that Phil later described to a colleague as the most politely I have ever been destroyed in my professional life. By January 15th, a contractor working for Fast Fix incorrectly kept a drainage line in the parking structure, causing water to pool near the foundation, directly beside the support column Muckers had flagged in October. A structural engineer had to be called. The repair estimate came in at $43,000. Derek reviewed the numbers and told Phil to handle it. Phil was handling nothing. Phil was quietly updating his resume. Derek, meanwhile, had been comfortably unaware that the contractor arrangement he had set up with Fast Fix Solutions was drawing exactly the kind of scrutiny he had never anticipated. One of the building's institutional tenants, a financial services firm on the 6th floor, had a standard clause in their lease Rukwarung documentation of all major service contract changes. When they requested the Fast Fix procurement records in January, they found no competitive bidding process, no independent cost analysis, and a service agreement with terms substantially more favorable to Fast Fix than to Caldwell Properties. They flagged it to their legal team. Their legal team sent a letter to the building's ownership group. The ownership group forwarded it to their internal auditor. The investigation was quiet. These things always are at first. Muckers knew none of this when he walked into Judd Caldwell's office on the 28th of December in a clean suit he had pressed himself. Judd shook his hand firmly, poured them both coffee, and sat across from him, not like a former owner meeting a maintenance worker, but like two men who both understood what they were actually there to discuss. "Tell me what you know about this building," Judd said. "Not the pipes, the investment." Muckers opened his legal pad. For the next 90 minutes, he walked Gerald through everything he had been studying for 3 years. The building's current valuation, its rent roll, its vacancy trends, the below-market leases on 2 floors that represented significant upside upon renewal, the deferred maintenance that had been accumulating under Derek's watch and was now suppressing the asset's true value. He talked about cap rate compression in the submarket, about the private equity appetite for stabilized commercial assets in that zip code, about a specific acquisition group he had met at an investor meetup 8 months earlier that had expressed interest in exactly this type of property. Gerald sat very still through all of it. When Marcus finished, Gerald set down his coffee cup and said, "How long have you been working on this?" 3 years of studying, Marcus said. 11 years of knowing the building. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. "You know what the difference is between you and every MBA I've hired in the last decade?" Marcus waited. "They studied buildings on paper," Gerald said. "You studied this building from the inside. You know where every dollar of value is hiding because you've touched it with your hands." He leaned forward. "I still own 14% of that property, Marcus, and I have a relationship with a capital group that's been asking me for deal flow for 2 years. What I need is a partner who knows this asset better than anyone alive." He paused. "That's you." Marcus drove home that evening and sat in the car in front of his building for 10 minutes before going inside. When Diane asked him how it went, he said, "I think our daughter is going to grow up differently than we did." Next 4 months moved quickly. Gerald introduced Marcus to Meridian Capital Partners, a private equity group with a track record in value-add commercial acquisitions. Marcus prepared a detailed asset summary, a document so thorough, so grounded in operational knowledge and financial analysis that Meridian's lead partner read it twice and then called Gerald to ask who had written it. When Gerald told him, the partner laughed, not mockingly, admiringly. "A maintenance worker," he said. "I want to meet him." They met. The meeting ran 2 hours over schedule. By March, Meridian had structured an acquisition offer for Coldwell Properties. The ownership group, fatigued by the fast-fix disaster, the structural repair costs, the tenant complaints, and the ongoing internal audit into Durrock's procurement decisions, accepted the offer. Judd's minority stake became a meaningful piece of the transaction. And in the deal structure that Meridian proposed, with Judd's strong advocacy, Webb was brought in as an operational equity partner, a stakeholder with a financial interest in the building's performance and a formal role in its management going forward. On the morning of June 19th, Muckers sat at a conference table on the 7th floor of a downtown office building and signed his name to a set of documents that made him, in precise legal terms, a part owner of the building where 6 months earlier he had been escorted out by a security guard on Christmas Eve. Judd Coldwell sat beside him and said nothing. He just nodded once. Hucker Chun, who had heard through the tenant grapevine that something significant was happening, sent Muckers a text message that morning that read simply, "I told you, best thing about that building." Muckers stared at it for a long time before he could respond. Derek Hollis had been terminated in February quietly by email after the internal audit substantiated the conflict of interest findings related to fast-fix solutions. There was no party. There was no cardboard box ceremony. There was an email, a final check, and a non-disclosure agreement. He cleaned out his own desk. Nobody watched. Muckers heard about it the same way he heard most things, calmly, without celebration, and without any particular need to remark on it. What Durrock had done to him was real, and the pain of that Christmas Eve was real, and none of that disappeared simply because the arc had bent toward justice. But Muckers was not a man who needed to watch someone fall to feel complete. He was a man who needed to build. And build he did. He walked into that building on his first official day, not with a mop cart and a maintenance badge, but with a key fob, a leather notebook, and the quiet certainty of someone who had known exactly what he was worth long before anyone else had bothered to find out. He stopped on the way in at the mechanical closet by the stairs, opened it, checked the valve, tight as he had left it. He smiled, closed the door, and went to work. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because this is only one of hundreds of powerful stories waiting for you on this channel. Your support keeps these stories alive. We'll see you in the next one.